G'day, my name is Michael Hewson and I'm an environmental geographer here at Central Queensland University. I'm on the Rockhampton campus, and Rockhampton is on the east coast of Australia at the Tropic of Capricorn. And yes, it's about 22 degrees Celsius outside and it's still winter. Well, that's all right, isn't it? What I would like to do today is present for you a creative non-fiction piece that reflects on an iconic example in Australia from the mid-1980s of how a creative artifact, a photograph as it happens, influenced and changed government environmental policy. My point will be that maybe we need to do that again. Let the humanities, let artists tell the science message. So, a picture paints a policy change. For many of us, perhaps you included, the question is, why is some government policy not reflecting the science? So in the climate emergency, there's plenty of erudite reporting, plenty of quantitative analysis, which suggests that a biodiversity, an environmental and a climate crisis are upon us. Why is it in some countries that the public policy doesn't reflect that reality? Is it in the messaging? Well, whatever the reason is, plenty of people have been pontificating on it. I mean, let's be clear, it's not as if the messaging from science has been lacking. This intriguing article from the Philosophical Magazine and Journal of Science, and the date of that is April 1896. Fancy that. Since 1896, there has been a science report on the influence of carbonic acid in the air upon the temperature of the ground. Now, it's something different, isn't it? It's something about a communication gap. It's something psychological. It's something about short-term politics. It's all those things. And many people have been writing on that. So I'm going to leave that as read, if I may, and I think you understand what it's about. What I would like to put before you is that the humanities can assist selling the science message, can help connect with the public, and the public at large in turn, particularly in nations like ours, drive public and government environmental policy. Strategic storytelling is well known, and Dave McKinsey in his writings was reflecting on the organisational business practice of needing to tell a strategic story to staff to move them from an old reality to a new reality. The documentation and the persuasiveness around storytelling to make change management occur. So I propose that strategic storytelling is something that we in the humanities can help with. And I'd like to give you an example of that. So in the mid-1980s, the environmental consciousness was being represented in a southern state of Australia called Tasmania. Tasmania still had a large part of its countryside as wilderness, particularly the southwestern corner. And the then Tasmanian state government wanted to dam some of those wild rivers for electrical energy, hydroelectricity. And I think it's just a matter of record then that as that government policy was being enacted at a state level to dam these wild rivers in what was pristine wilderness, that the public took umbrage. And from the late 70s through to the mid 80s, there was quite a number of organisations that were born, like the Wilderness Society, and arguably the Australian political organisation known as the Australian Greens, started out by the blockading action on the Gordon-Franklin River system to stop the Tasmanian state government making dams on these wild rivers. During the time, activists rediscovered Australian Indigenous cultural history on the land, and a number of pop songs, particularly this one, like the Franklin Flow, were driving public opinion at the time. But it was about a photograph, one single photograph, which changed government policy. So the players then was the then Prime Minister, Robert J. Hawke, known as Bob Hawke. He was a fairly long-term Labor government Prime Minister at the time. Leading the activists was the future leader of the Australian Greens, then a general practitioner named Bob Brown, and a wilderness photographer known as Peter Dombrovskis. For Americans, you will reflect on Ansel Adams as an iconic landscape photographer using large format cameras. I guess Peter was seen as the Australian version, arguably. And what I would like to do is reflect on his photograph, because essentially it changed public opinion as it was published in Australian dailies, the capital city dailies in Melbourne and Sydney. And that changed government policy. And so the federal government overrode the state government rights by using foreign policy to override state environmental policy, essentially to stop those works and to leave the area in its wild state and create a whole range of wilderness areas that are now on the register for Australians to enjoy. So I'm going to do it with a concrete prose. Now, you'll be familiar with concrete poetry. That's just words arranged in poetic form, which by their graphical nature do some of the interpretive heavy lifting of poetry. So this is an example from Deanna Couch and her blog. I'm going to show you a concrete prose. So there is a graphical element. Be aware that each line is a complete sentence. That's why it's a full stop at the end of every line. It's done in a staccato fashion deliberately. It feels clipped, but that's what it's about. It's meant to be a reflection on that action in the 1980s to help people understand that humanities can once again help scientists indicate to the public at large and influence public policy on the climate emergency. So here's the picture, Rock Island Bend it was called. It's just one of Peter's photographs, Peter Dombrovskis' photographs that was appropriated by the Wilderness Society, published in newspapers and influencing government policy. Now in this piece, there was a few Australianisms you will meet, like the Mabo decision. That's a High Court action that gave Australian Indigenous cultures land rights to some extent. There's reference to the MCG, the Melbourne Cricket Ground, and the SCG, the Sydney Cricket Ground, iconic sports fields. There's reference to the Murray-Darling River system, which is a contemporary tussle between environmental flows and agricultural use. So let's wander through the concrete prose called "A Picture Paints a Policy Change." Well, thank you very much for reading that. And I wonder if you agree with me on this historical example that an artwork influences government policy. Perhaps it can be done again. And look, I invite you to discuss it with me at the email address below. Cheers.